Welcome to Inside Politics with Kevin Klein, beyond the headlines, beyond the spin. Straight facts, sharp analysis, and common sense conversation you won't hear anywhere else. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Kevin Klein. Welcome to another edition of Inside Politics. I am joined once again by two of my colleagues from the Winnipeg Sun. We have columnist Geoff and columnist Royce, who is also a professor of political science at the University of Manitoba. You know, I wrote a column in the Winnipeg Sun a couple of days ago, gentlemen, that the headline on the front page was "Do Something," and a picture of Carney there, and got a lot of reaction online. And then I see we sent down some people to Mexico to develop a trade agreement there with Mexico because we're going to ignore the U.S. And Mexico basically shut the door on us and said, "Thanks very much for coming, but away you go."
Yeah, Royce, I think that this was kind of a black eye for the Canadian government. I mean, it's the Canadian government looks bad on this one because Mexico is one of our prime trading partners, part of the CUMSA agreement, and Canada wanted to enhance that, do more trade with Mexico, try strike up a kind of a side deal, and the Mexicans said no, thank you. That's not good.
Yeah, I mean, so Mark Carney was elected on the basis of the view that he was going to be able to deal with this threat from Trump. With respect to tariffs, and we were told that we just had to wait, we just had to wait, we just had to wait, But now we're starting to get real negative outcomes. And this situation with Mexico is a good example of that. The headline is Canada is trying to salvage its relationship with Mexico after falling out with Trump, but Mexico's president saying there's no need for any kind of bilateral trade agreement with Ottawa. So this is now we're starting to get negative outcomes, like the government is failing on this file, on exactly the file that they were elected to get us a deal on. And so this is getting very concerning very quickly, I think.
Not only failing, but they're not even talking about it. I mean, we don't. First of all, he doesn't have a budget, which I think is ludicrous. They're talking about maybe another $250 billion in debt that will go with some of his stuff that he's got going on right now, and he's not talking to anybody. He hasn't had a conversation. The last media report I saw that he had with Trump was near the end of June. He has not spoken to him. Like apparently reached out to him once. But nothing has happened yet. And I know he's trying to protect that little group in Quebec, the dairy farmer or the dairy, whatever you would call it, mafia, the dairy mafia in Quebec that, is the supply management. He's trying to protect that. There was a letter that the National Post got a hold of from some very influential senators and congressmen saying that they want Canada to get rid of the digital bill that they have. Carney did mention he might get rid of it, where no media is allowed on Facebook and there's all these rules, get rid of a bunch of these rules, but he's not acting fast enough. Not only that, we found out through Premier Daniel Smith that two major oil companies have stopped building any infrastructure here in Canada, told the Premier, and they're going down to the US. And they said, we just can't get things done in Canada. And where was the Prime Minister on that? I mean, get off your butt, call them up, fix that problem fast. But he again is staying out of the media and not doing anything other than lowering the price of a ferry ride on the East Coast and the West Coast. So that'll save us.
I get that you can't negotiate these deals in public, and we get that. However, I think your point's well taken that you can't be silent on the implication that a couple of major oil companies might be taking some of their operations south of the border. You can't be silent on something like that. You've got to be proactive. You've got to be in their boardrooms saying, look, fellas, we're going to make this work, and sort of calm the waters a little bit. And this is what Mark Carney is supposed to be able to do, is to kind of lower the temperature, calm the waters, keep the steady, keep things on an even keel. But at some point, it's kind of like Colonel Travis at the Alamo. The men need a word from you once in a while. You're right? We need a word from our leader that things are going to be okay.
Very
and
well.
We're not getting it.
Yeah, part of the problem is that the relationship between this government and the energy sector is so bad. It has been for so long, and we got indications right after the election that the new minister was going to be trying to rebuild those relationships, but that hasn't happened. One of the reasons with that Mexico, one of the reasons we have this problem with Mexico now is because it was only about a year ago that the former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made a big show about going to Mar-a-Lago and suggesting that we would get a bilateral trade agreement with the United States. Well, turns out Mexico was justifiably enraged by that, and they haven't forgotten. And so, one of the things that Mark Carney is dealing with here is the legacy of absolutely a terrible record of Justin Trudeau on dealing with Mexico, dealing with the energy sector. And so a lot of these problems, they can be traced back to the previous iteration of this liberal government.
Yeah, but he was to blame, I think, in some of that because he was, of course, consulting for Trudeau, right? And I mean, if he
Sure.
knows that these are problems, and I think Geoff put it very well, he was supposed to be the adult at the table, the guy coming to the rescue, going to calm the storm, if you will. And even after Mexico made the announcement, he made no gesture, nothing. He has said basically nothing. He is not answering questions on it. He's doing this typical Trudeau stuff, the handshakes, giving out some money for projects here and there, and nothing is getting done. He's been in office now for over 100 days.
Yeah. And it was Carney who appointed the exact same minister who provoked Mexico. He kept Champagne in the portfolio and sent him down to Mexico to negotiate a deal with the country that a year ago he had offended. And so, yeah, Carney's fingerprints are all over this in terms of his own role as an advisor to Trudeau, but also in terms of the choices he's made as prime minister. He's to blame. He's the accountability stops with the prime minister, and that's him.
No, I wonder to what extent the Mexicans would be concerned with retribution from the Trump administration if they were to strike a separate deal with Canada. And then that must come into their minds as well.
I would certainly think so. I mean, we've talked about it on this program. You see other pundits talking about it and writing columns on it. The U.S. is a major trading partner and the biggest trading partner for us, and probably the biggest trading partner for Mexico. They're not going to want to, create any more trouble in the United States. And you can say what you want about Trump, but they're trying to manage Trump the best that they can. So saying no to Canada, I mean, you have to look at that, right? Do we stand with Canada and get beat up more by the U.S., or do we stay away and just keep working with the U.S.? We got the extra tariffs put on us. Mexico did not. You know,
Yeah. Now tariffs were slapped on 50 different countries around the world this week. Canada was just one of them.
my biggest question right now with all this happening and not having a budget, Royce, and you being a professor of political science could maybe help me here. How is he getting away with continuing to spend this kind of money? I mean, they're like children in school. They don't work during the summer. Nobody's at Parliament. They should all be there. We're in one of the biggest crises we've been in decades. It could be the biggest, depending on what happens. He's really not showing any leadership in any way, shape, or form. We're just spending money we don't have and saying, well, we're going to get it from this or we're going to get it from that. And we're not seeing evidence. He's ignoring the problem. How can he do all this without a vote in Parliament?
Yeah, I mean, the governments can spend money. They can allocate money or funding, even when Parliament isn't in session. Parliament isn't in session all the time. That doesn't mean the government stops operating when Parliament isn't there. The problem is that the Prime Minister would have benefited, I think, from a budget that was signed off on by Parliament that actually identified their priorities, that identified their big spending projects, and that was actually debated and was passed by Parliament. The problem right now is that, you don't always hear this from people. People still have a pretty positive impression of Carney, but the idea that, months and months are going on and the Prime Minister is escaping accountability. He's not putting a clear budget forward. He's not identifying his priorities. It gets worse and worse for him when time goes on with this. I think he made a mistake by not introducing a budget back when Parliament is in session. And if we are in an emergency situation with these Trump tariffs, and the Liberal ministers never tire of saying that we are, then there's no reason why Parliament can't sit during the summertime. There's no reason why they can't come back and sign off on this spending, sign off on the Liberals' priorities right now.
Especially because he knows he would win the vote, right? He's got the NDP that is going to support him. So I don't know why you wouldn't want to go back there and do the work, unless he's taking this time do some training, if you will, on how to deal with Polyv when Polyv gets back in the House.
If he does.
Well,
Well,
he's getting back in.
yeah, he might be. I think that'll be hard on him when Polyev does get back into the House. I think that's a pretty sure thing in this particular seat. I think the Tories won it with 86% of the vote in the last election. And, Carney called that by-election. I have to give him credit. I think I'm pretty hard on Carney, but he said he was going to do it and he did it. He said no games and he called it right away. And so I would be concerned if I was him. Yeah, dealing with Polyev. Polyev is a veteran. He's very effective in question period. And Carney is not so much. Carney is still a pretty green politician in some ways. And so it'll be rougher for him when Parliament comes back. But that's the job. It's the job he wanted. Governments are supposed to be held accountable. They're supposed to go in there and have the opposition members ask them questions. There's no reason why that shouldn't be happening, especially given the challenges that this country is facing right now.
Yeah, but let me just tell you this, guys, as somebody who's participated in question period, it's a joke. It's a waste of time. And really all it is to try and get some sound bites. And so they could put them on TikTok and all that kind of stuff now, because I don't think anything fruitful comes from that discussion. And, especially at the Manitoba legislature, it was just nonsense. You don't get an answer, you get political spin, and then they take those videos and use them for their own thing. But I want to see them working for the country. And Geoff, I guess, as you said before, too, he was supposed to be the leader that came in and put us back on the right track. But he does seem to be MIA. He's missing in action.
Yeah. Well, and when it comes to, they do call it question period, not answer period. You'll get a response, but seldom an answer. Justin Trudeau is a master of that, of giving you a response, but never an answer to an actual question. But it's showbiz for the people who are political junkies. But you're right. I think Mark Carney he is supposed to be bringing a budget down in the fall, but he really should have delivered one in the spring. But and I think is only to bring one down this fall because of the pressure that's being applied to the Liberal government. But whatever budget they bring down, you're right, Kevin, it's going to pass. The NDP is not going to block any kind of budgetary and any kind of spending on the part of the Liberal government. But Mark Carney has got to step up. He is, he can't just be kind of this sort of transparent, when I say transparent or translucent individual, where there doesn't appear to be the substance that we had hoped for. This was supposed to be a man of substance, that we were going to move from the Justin Trudeau image-driven government to a substance-driven government by Mark Carney. And we're not seeing that yet. And I'm concerned. We may see it eventually, but the first 100 days often tell you a lot about how a government is going to behave. And we've not seen the man of substance that we'd hoped for.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing too is on question period. I know you're both very critical of this, but in countries like Canada, the Prime Minister is immensely powerful, very powerful political figure. And question period is one of the only ways that we can actually hold the person in that role accountable, hold the cabinet accountable. Every 4 days a week, the members of the cabinet have to trudge into the House of Commons and have these opposition MPs assail them and attack them and ask them leading questions. And so I'm a fan of question period while recognizing it's a little bit of a circus. And Kevin, I have to admit the Manitoba legislature is pretty bad, like in terms of the atmosphere, far worse than the House of Commons. A few months ago there was that whole episode where Wab Kinew and Abby Connor just sitting there in estimates basically insulting each other. And that's not accountability. That's not what these forums are supposed to achieve. So I'm a fan of question period, but while recognizing, there are problems you both identified.
So let's move on to the premiers for a couple of seconds, because there's been a couple of premiers that have made the news. First and foremost, Ford. Ford went on CNN during this time. Went on CNN. I think he loves being on camera. I think he's more like Trump than we think. But he went on CNN and said that Trump was the most hated politician in the world in Canada. Where is that going to help us?
Well, might not help us, but he was probably telling the truth. Uh, but it's probably not going to be particularly helpful. It's interesting that Ford has been a consistent Carney supporter. He's backed Carney. He's spoken well of him. Thinks he's on the right track. So I mean, there's got to be some conversations. There's got to be something going on in the back rooms that the rest of us aren't getting to see, because there's nothing that is apparent to the Canadian public that would make you think that Mark Carney is on the right track. But Ford seems to be in his corner for some reason, and it's um, for reasons we can't see.
But it's so childish to come out and say that kind of stuff, especially on a national news program.
It's a bit of a disaster. It's not acting in Canada's best interest to go out there and be antagonistic in that way. Canada needs statesmen right now, not local politicians going out and saying intemperate things. And by the way, CNN, the people watching that, Americans don't care if Trump is popular in Canada. In fact, they might like that he's not popular in Canada or in Europe or in Australia. That's fine by them. They elected him to take on countries, to hold, to I don't know what was the wording he used. They're
Oh,
going to pay their fair share.
yeah, yeah,
That's part of the reason why they elected him.
yeah.
And so Ford is just so undisciplined. I don't get it. We have some outstanding premiers in this country right now. He is not one of them. He's right at the bottom of the barrel, I think, along with Tim Houston, who had his own kind of crazy news this past week as well.
Yeah, where he banned going into forest. You can't, but however, I saw on, and I don't haven't done the research on this yet, so I'll preface that with I haven't confirmed this yet, but there's a group of pro-Palestinian protesters that are going to do a hike through the forest, and they're allowed to do it because it's considered a protest. So even though nobody is allowed to go in the forest and they'll get charged a $25,000 fine if they go in, this pro-Palestinian group, again, haven't confirmed it, but I've seen it in a number of places, is going to walk through the forest in a protest. And they're allowed to do that. And the RCMP will be there with them because this is an organized event. So yeah, Tim did that. I'll go back to Ford to get Geoff's opinion on this. I don't understand why he's not fighting to get the pipeline done. He talked about it. He talked about having facilities in Ontario. He needs to have more happening in Ontario. He, did a deal with Saskatchewan and Alberta. Manitoba, of course, shied away from it for silly reasons. But, why would he come out and do this as opposed to pushing the good that can happen right now?
Yeah, I don't know what would be motivating him to disparage the U.S. president on national television in the States. Um, it certainly it's poking the bear for sure. It was a kind of a Trumpian kind of statement to make, not inaccurate, but I don't know that a lot of good is going to come out of it. And I think really what Ford and the premiers of Saskatchewan and Alberta ought to be doing is having a little conference call with Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew saying, we need you to get on board because we want to get a pipeline running through from Alberta to the East Coast. We want to start refining our own oil products. We want to drive down the price of gas for Canadians. We shouldn't be paying. I've said this before. There's no way Canada should be paying the global price for oil. There's no way we should be paying that much.
Yeah. Yeah.
We should be refining our own oil and setting our own price internally, and we should be exporting our oil to markets that need it right now. The European Union needs oil right now. Russia is not a popular supplier for a lot of people, and Canada would be a much more popular supplier of oil for a lot of European nations and African nations as well, who may not want to do business with the Kremlin. There's a far greater sense of urgency to do that than to spend time on CNN.
Well said. Well said. And
Yeah.
again, where's the urgency? Where's the
Yeah.
urgency? You
And
want to
we
make
just
life
we
more
just
affordable for Canadians.
yeah, we
Where's
don't
the
do we just do as we said, we don't do urgent, we don't do bold in Canada, we don't do urgent in Canada.
I just want him to do something. Just do something. I don't like do something that's going to help the country. Any politician across, do something that's going to help fix this problem instead of ignoring it because they're like most politicians. If you ignore the problem, it doesn't exist. But that's not true. It's still there.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like Jeff's comments. We have to step back sometimes and remember that Canada is resource rich, oil, gas, enormous potential for electricity, and yet Canadians pay way more than they should for gasoline, for electricity. Why is that? Why don't we have politicians that to try to keep costs down for Canadians? In the 50s and 60s and 70s in British Columbia, the government built dams. They built a bunch of dams. Electricity was cheap. They put in a whole bus network in Vancouver that was electric way before its time because electricity was so cheap. Why don't we have the kind of visionary politicians that can do things like that for Canadians nowadays? There's no reason why we should be paying so much money. The government should be acting in our interests, I think.
Because it's a popularity contest now, politics. That's all it is. Popularity. We're not electing the right people for the job. We're electing those that are most popular or do well on social media. The other thing that I have an issue with now that we're talking a little bit about Manitoba is Wab Kinew suggesting that maybe it's time for an Indigenous Crown that would be able to have a say in any and all developments. So I just don't understand, and maybe I'll ask you. We'll go to Geoff first on this one because he understands what's kind of happening or what he would like to see happen. We're kind of handing the power over to one group now.
You have to be a little cautious, I think, about this one. I think Premier Canoe needs to be very cautious about this. There's already a duty to consult First Nations on any natural resource or any energy projects, any major projects that would impact the First Nations. There is already a clear duty to consult. Now, is there a duty to allow veto? That's a whole other conversation, because consultation is not necessarily veto power. Now, from a First Nation standpoint, I get that they feel that in many cases that the consultation process is a little bit like the city of Winnipeg's public consultation processes, that it's just there. It's there because, well, we have to do this and it's for show. Hey, if a lot of the First Nations feel that that's taken place, I get that. I think that, and there's reason for them to believe that. However, I think it would be a potentially dangerous concept to allow, for example, a First Nation of a few hundred people to block a major project which could impact everybody in Manitoba and potentially other Canadians as well. And I know as somebody, and I think I've said this before, that somebody once said, democracy can't just be two wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for dinner. But at the same time, the most salient feature of a democracy is that the will of the majority prevails. And I think we need to be careful about allowing a minority to dictate the will of the majority, to override the will of the majority. I think we have to try to balance those things out. We can't be, as René Lévesque once said, the former Quebec premier, a society can be judged on how well it treats its minorities. And I think we all agree that in this case, and when it comes to our Indigenous population, that Canada's track record is not very good. So we need to do something about that, and I think efforts are being made. Having said that, I think granting veto power to a small number of First Nations, or even one First Nation, over a major infrastructure or energy product might be a dangerous precedent to set.
Yeah, there is the duty to consult, and as Geoff noted, sometimes this is carried out in a way that it's kind of ad hoc, it's not transparent, and that's not good for investors either. When there's not a clear process, when it's not, clear what you have to do to get the right outcome, that's no good. And so I'm actually open to these things. Wab Kinew's idea, if it's going to kind of institutionalize a certain process, make things more transparent, I would want to see the details of what's actually there. But, these kinds of efforts, politicians like to keep things flexible for themselves. But I actually think that some of these sorts of efforts could be good, not only for Indigenous people that are looking for that consultation to actually mean something, but also for investors. We have people that want more clarity, more transparency on the process for actually getting some of these big projects going. This was the big problem, maybe the central problem of Justin Trudeau's time as Prime Minister. You have these big energy projects that it would take like 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, 20 years to get approval, and no one really knew what the entirety of that approval process would look like, environmental approvals. And so adding clarity is a good thing. I'd like to see the details on what the Premier has to is thinking about here, but it's not a bad idea on its face, and it might actually be a good thing.
Yeah, I gotta have to disagree with you. I mean, I know at Winnipeg City Council when I was on there, like all the consultations that we had done and stuff was just it just delayed everything and delayed everything. And I mean, it can take you 10 years to get a permit to build a garage in Winnipeg, for goodness sakes, right? I mean, there's delays everywhere, and that's just the government. Government, creates timelines that are unrealistic and that just work for them. My feeling is, why not to sit down then as federally and say, because I might get killed for this, but it's all about the money. It's just about the money. That's what this is about, right? Like, what's the share? What's the percentage? And I've seen that on the provincial side. Like, when I would see environment things come through and Indigenous groups, they're looking for some money for that, and I'm okay. Geoff has talked about that before. That's a great idea. Why don't we just set what the rate is, and now people can invest and they know? Because if everything is different, and if every part of the province you go to is going to be a different rate of return or a different amount of percentage that you have to offer, that's not going to fix things. I'm sorry. As an investor and a business
Yeah.
person, I don't see that happening. I don't see that working.
Yeah, Kevin, I think that if the consultation process was genuine and sincere, and our provincial government was really truly interested in instituting projects that took into consideration the concerns of First Nations
Mhm.
and made sure that the projects were going to benefit residents of the First Nations, we wouldn't need to create a new Crown corporation. If the process that is in place now was being faithfully and sincerely and honestly and openly and in good faith observed, we wouldn't need to create a new agency for it.
But here's what's
Right?
happening. Yeah, you both know about CO Silica and the mining that was going to be done here and the disaster that that became. And then because the conservatives, they just messed it right up. But CO Silica now is working with an Indigenous group who's going to do a vote on whether or not to support CO Silica. Now, this affects a larger community. The community didn't want the wells, although there's already wells there, but they didn't want the wells. So what happens now then that this Indigenous group signs a partnership with CO Silica? Does the government just put it through then? Because now you're going to have a whole community that's divided, and now you've created a much bigger problem. So, do they get say on that, or does the community still get say on that? Or should it just be a government decision based on facts?
Well, ultimately, the government is hired to make those tough decisions and the needs of the many.
Hmm.
Well, it might be that a process incorporates feedback from the local community. I would expect there would be some kind of consultation, and an actual consultation with the people whose lives would be affected. But that kind of process itself, the idea of side deals, the company has to go in and curry favor. Yeah, that kind of thing is, I would think, something that we would probably want to get away from. Like, have a clear process that everyone follows. Here are the steps, here are the criteria, here's what you have to do. I think you'd get better outcomes, both for the members of these communities and for investors. But again, I'd have to see what the premier is actually proposing here.
But how do you make sure that that money, like say they get a percentage of 5% or whatever that is, and we have to cut down with the percentage of the province and the country gets because businesses aren't going to lose money in these ventures, and we're not seeing any mining applications, and that could be why we're not seeing any here in Manitoba. We're certainly not hearing about any being approved, or Canada working on them but all you hear is politicians talking about minerals. What? How do we make sure that that money actually gets to the people? Because I get a lot of people that will tell me that, and I get a lot of people saying, well, is the money going to the people of that community? Are they really benefiting from it? That's an important thing. And I know Harper tried to do that and got, pretty much lost the election because of it, right? I mean, that was one of the reasons when he wanted accountability for where the funds were going. How do you make sure?
Well, that's a structural problem, and Royce has got more thorough knowledge than I do on this one. But If when all the funds that go into a First Nation are funneled through the band office, I think that makes it problematic
Mhm.
on a lot of different levels.
Yeah, and First Nations people, they have elections. They have mechanisms to deal with this sort of thing. If they feel that they don't approve, then they can hold their politicians accountable. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's hard. I guess the process we're talking about, it would include the kind of First Nation government, and I mean, you can envision a process that would actually lead to a dividend being sent directly to the members of these communities. I could actually see that being built into the process rather than going to the First Nation government itself. But yeah, I'm not sure what that would consist of. I just think there's better ways of doing it than we're doing now.
That's
Right now, as you say, we don't get investment in Manitoba for mining. And I think the real concern there, it's uncertainty. I mean, you're in business, Kevin, you know this better than I do, but it's the uncertainty that's the killer. Even a bad process that's clear would be better than uncertainty. And these mining projects, they're profitable. Like if it's going to cut into their profit margin a bit because some money has to go to local residents, great, great. Yeah, they can swallow those costs, believe me.
Mhm.
But the question is, do we actually have a process that's going to accommodate these projects and that's going to give the members of the community their fair share?
So, and that's what I'm trying to get at. If I was back in politics and I had the opportunity, I would want to put forward a program that's going to be the same for everybody, but where the people of the community, the Indigenous community, get a dividend. I spent time in Florida and I started researching the Seminole Indians, and that's what they call themselves, the Seminole Indians, probably the richest Indigenous group in the world. And every band member gets a dividend check. And at one point, I think it was around $8,000 a month because they're invested in so much. They've invested in lots of stuff. They've used their land for tourist attractions. I think they own the Hard Rock Cafe now all across the world. They have casinos and all this stuff. So, but they take that money and every member of the community gets a dividend check. That doesn't happen here. So I'm
Well,
okay
the
with doing
system, yeah,
this because, like Geoff said, it's a good way for reconciliation and to give back. But I want to make sure that it's a dividend check going to members of that community, not to one office and then, granted out at will.
yeah, it's a problem with the system that's been created and which has been imposed on these First Nations, right? The idea that all of the money flows through the band council, and this is a much longer conversation. We need some First Nations input on this, but I always thought that their terms of 2 years are not nearly long enough.
Hmm.
That there should be a 4 year term on First Nations instead of 2 years, because you're perpetually running for office with a 2 year cycle. It doesn't give any chief or band council time to really properly. You got to go through the cycle once or twice before you get the hang of the job, and doing it every 2 years is not very effective, I don't think. So, I mean, if I was the Assembly of First Nations, I'd be lobbying to have a national election day every 4 years, fixed election day every 4 years, so that the chief and band council of every First Nation in Canada gets a fresh start on whatever the date is, and gets a 4 year term to make sure that they can actually accomplish some of the good that needs to be done for their local community. But the system that's been imposed on these people now on for our First Nations, it almost guarantees corruption. It almost guarantees it. When
But
when the
Royce,
money is when the money flows to one individual or a very small group of individuals and then is distributed at their discretion, you're almost guaranteeing a certain measure of corruption.
Do the First Nations not have the ability to change when their elections are? I thought there were a couple of Indigenous organizations that had 4 year elections.
Yeah, I actually don't know. I think that some of these things would be contained within the federal act that governs these things, but I actually don't know. 2 years. I didn't even know that there were 2 year elections. That's quite shocking to me, actually. Yeah, that's not ideal. It creates instability in countries with 2 year election cycles. it's not a good thing. As Geoff says, that we're going to see constant campaigning, but I have to be honest, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I did, and it does. I think Geoff was bang on. It is you're campaigning in the last year, so you have 1 year to do something, and then in the last year you're campaigning again. So it is perpetual. You're just constantly doing the same kind of programming. You know, it's funny. We'll wrap up here, but all the topics we talked about today, I appreciate the good conversation we had on them. But there's so many things wrong. I want to get back to the fact that if you just listen to what we discussed and the things that we should be working on and our politicians should be working on, and they're not having these discussions. They're not.
Yeah. Well, if they are, they're not sharing them with the rest of us.
Well, and they'd be doing something. They're not doing anything. And I can blame Carney for that, but I can blame all the politicians. Like, what are you doing? Where are the answers? Where are your suggestions? When are you coming out with something that will actually make a difference? And I mean, you know, now when you think about it, I think, well, the way it's going, I'd rather have 2 year elections in Canada then, so that at least we can change them up faster because we're stuck with them for so long. They just get in there and they wait. They hold on, right? They hold on. But again, great discussion today on a number of topics, all topics that are important to Canada that politicians are ignoring right now. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll talk again next week.
Thanks for watching Inside Politics with Kevin Klein. Please like and subscribe to this channel and visit thewinnipegsun.com for more.